Ever wondered about the most bizarre secret government projects? Like World War II's Bat Bomb, which involved releasing bats with incendiary devices to ignite Japanese cities. Or Project A119, a Cold War plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon to showcase U.S. dominance. That's right. You can't make this stuff up. And today we peel back the veil on 11 of the most absurd secret American government operations that are almost too crazy to be real. Let's get started. 11th. Acoustic Kitty. Using cats to spy on the Soviets. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a battle of espionage and innovation, with both nations developing outlandish strategies to outwit the other. Among the most bizarre ideas conceived by the CIA was Acoustic Kitty, a project to turn ordinary cats into stealthy living spy devices. The concept arose in the 1960s after CIA officers, frustrated by the difficulty of eavesdropping on Soviet officials, noticed the abundance of stray cats near their targets. Unlike humans, cats could roam unnoticed in public spaces, making them potential tools for espionage. The plan was as audacious as it was strange. The CIA believed that by surgically implanting tiny microphones and radio transmitters inside a cat, it could record conversations and relay them back in real time. To make this vision a reality, they enlisted a veterinary surgeon to perform an hour-long procedure on a cat, implanting batteries, wires, and audio equipment into its body. According to former CIA officer Victor Marchetti, the process was invasive and extreme. They slit the cat open, put batteries in him, wired him up. The result was the world's first acoustic kitty. Despite its ambitious beginnings, the project quickly ran into complications. The small batteries severely limited recording time, and training the cats to stay focused on missions proved nearly impossible. Cats, being independent creatures, often wandered off in search of food or became distracted. These challenges culminated in a catastrophic first field test. The CIA released their experimental spy cat to eavesdrop on two men in a Washington, D.C. park. Tragically, the cat barely made it to the target before it was struck and killed by a passing taxi. With the project's failure and the loss of their feline operative, the CIA abandoned Acoustic Kitty, writing off the experiment as an expensive misstep in their race for Cold War superiority. 10th. Project X-Ray. Strapping bombs to live bats. To attack the Japanese. World War II ushered in an era of unconventional warfare experimentation, culminating in the development of the atomic bomb. However, before nuclear technology reshaped global conflict, the U.S. military entertained an equally bizarre concept: the bat bomb. Unlike the fictional gadgets wielded by superheroes, this device involved real bats armed with incendiary explosives. The idea came from Little S. Adams, a Pennsylvania dentist inspired after visiting New Mexico's Carlsbad Caverns, home to countless bats. Adams, who had a peculiar disdain for bats, proposed using them as weapons. In a letter to the White House in January 1942, he argued that bats, often associated with darkness and evil, were divinely created to serve a higher purpose in wartime. He suggested outfitting bats with timed incendiary devices, dropping them en masse over Japanese cities, and letting them roost in the wooden and bamboo buildings before igniting the bombs. Remarkably, President Franklin D. Roosevelt approved the proposal, leading to the launch of Project X-Ray. The plan involved putting bats into hibernation and transporting them in chilled compartments. Once outfitted with tiny timed bombs, the bats would be released over enemy cities. The theory was that they would instinctively seek shelter under roofs, where the explosives would detonate and set structures ablaze. On May 15, 1943, tests were conducted at Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Base in New Mexico. Things went awry when some bats were released prematurely, igniting unintended fires, including the destruction of a barn and a general's car. Despite these mishaps, military leaders saw potential in the idea and wanted to continue. The project was ultimately shelved when Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King learned the Bat Bomb wouldn't be operational until mid-1945. By then, resources were being funneled into the Manhattan Project. Despite its cancellation, Project X-Ray had consumed over $2 million, equivalent to more than $35 million today. 9. Project A-119, a plan to nuke. The Moon, during the Cold War, another intense rivalry was taking shape in full public view, the space race. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were eager to showcase their technological advancements, and space exploration became the ultimate battleground for this competition. Before the U.S. could make history by landing a man on the Moon, the Soviets pulled ahead in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik, the first satellite to orbit Earth. This milestone left the U.S. searching for a way to regain the upper hand, and one of the more unconventional ideas they developed was Project A-119, a proposal to detonate a nuclear bomb on the Moon. As ridiculous as it sounds, this was a real plan. The U.S. Air Force enlisted top scientists to explore the effects of a nuclear explosion on the Moon's surface. The idea was to create a massive mushroom cloud on the far side of the Moon, which would then be illuminated by sunlight and visible from Earth. This dramatic display was intended to demonstrate American power and technological superiority, particularly to the Soviet Union. However, the plan wasn't without its drawbacks. Scientists expressed concerns about damaging the Moon, including the possibility of creating a massive, permanent crater. Additionally, there was the risk of public outrage, as the idea of bombing the Moon might have been seen as reckless or unethical. Ultimately, Project A-119 never moved forward and remained a secret until 2000, when details were made public. Even then, the idea sparked debate. British nuclear historian David Lowry criticized it as obscene, while some argued it could have contributed valuable insights into lunar science. Though it sounds far-fetched today, it's a reminder of how close history came to an explosive turn during the space race. 8. Operation Fantasia, a World War II plan to scare the Japanese with glowing foxes. Japan is a country deeply rooted in spirituality and folklore. Today, more than 87 million people identify with Shinto, and shrines dedicated to various deities are scattered throughout the nation. Equally prominent in Japanese culture are yokai, legendary creatures that populate folklore. Among the most famous of these is the kitsune, a supernatural fox often depicted as a mischievous trickster or a being capable of enchanting humans. During World War II, the United States tried to weaponize these traditional beliefs in a bizarre psychological warfare initiative called Operation Fantasia. The idea was sparked by William Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, who urged his team to find creative ways to outfox the Axis powers. Taking this suggestion quite literally, Ed Salinger, an OSS psychological warfare strategist with prior experience in Japan, proposed exploiting the Japanese belief in kitsune to scare the population into submission. Salinger's plan involved deploying balloons shaped like foxes over Japanese villages. To amplify the effect, soldiers would play sounds mimicking fox cries to convince locals they were under attack by supernatural kitsune. However, the proposal was steeped in racism, as Salinger's memo openly described the Japanese as gullible and overly superstitious, suggesting they could be easily manipulated by such tactics. The original balloon plan was scrapped in favor of something even more outlandish: capturing live foxes in China and Australia, painting them with glow-in-the-dark paint, and releasing them in Japanese villages. To test this idea, the OSS released 30 painted foxes in a Washington, D.C. park, where they did indeed frighten passers-by. Emboldened by this result, they next tested whether foxes could be dropped near the Chesapeake Bay and swim ashore. While the foxes successfully made it to land, the glowing paint washed off during their swim, rendering the plan ineffective. Salinger proposed other iterations of Operation Fantasia, such as enlisting Japanese allies to pretend they were possessed by fox spirits. However, none of these ideas progressed beyond the planning stage. Ultimately, the OSS deemed the project impractical and abandoned it altogether. Operation Monopoly, digging a tunnel underneath the Soviet embassy. In 1977, the Soviet Union relocated its embassy to a new building in Washington, D.C. Its close proximity to the White House and Capitol building sparked serious concerns among U.S. intelligence officials. Could the Soviets use advanced technology to spy on American leaders from this strategic location? These fears gave rise to Operation Monopoly, an ambitious yet ultimately disastrous FBI plan to turn the tables on the Soviets. The FBI acquired a house directly across the street from the new Soviet embassy and began secretly digging a tunnel beneath it. The goal was to install surveillance equipment under the embassy to monitor Soviet activities and communications. But from the very beginning, the project faced significant challenges. Poor planning led to persistent water leaks in the tunnel, and much of the equipment installed either malfunctioned or failed entirely. Adding to the complications, the Soviets likely knew about the operation almost from the start. The FBI's safe house raised suspicions with its cameras, perpetually closed curtains, and lack of mail deliveries. Yet, despite these obvious issues, construction on the tunnel continued for over a decade. By the time the project ended, it had cost the FBI hundreds of millions of dollars and yielded nothing useful. As FBI Assistant Director John F. Lewis later admitted, the tunnel produced no information of any kind. Worse yet, the operation's failure was compounded by treachery within the FBI itself. In 2001, an investigation revealed that Robert Hanssen, an FBI agent turned double agent, had been leaking classified information to the Soviets for years, including details about the tunnel project. Hanssen's betrayal ensured that Operation Monopoly was doomed from the outset. Hanssen was ultimately convicted on 14 counts of espionage and 1 count of conspiracy, receiving a life sentence without parole. Meanwhile, Operation Monopoly became infamous as one of the most embarrassing and costly failures in FBI history. 6. Project Chariot, the U.S. government's plan to nuke Alaska. The U.S. military once considered using nuclear explosions for more than just warfare, including creating infrastructure. One of the most audacious examples was Project Chariot, a 1958 plan to detonate nuclear bombs in Alaska to carve out a man-made harbor. Part of the broader Operation Plowshare, which explored peaceful applications of nuclear weapons, Project Chariot proposed setting off 5 thermonuclear devices near the Chukchi Sea. The goal was to create a deep-water port that could support the export of coal during the region's brief 3-month thaw each year, which planners hoped would boost Alaska's economy before it became a state in 1959. However, the project quickly drew widespread criticism. Local communities, many of whom were Inupiat people living in sod homes and relying on traditional hunting and fishing, feared the blasts would destroy their environment and way of life. Caribou, fish, and whales, essential to their survival, would have been severely impacted. Scientists also raised alarms, with even the Atomic Energy Commission expressing doubt. One report described it as a great stretch of one's imagination to predict the effects of a nuclear detonation on the area. By 1962, public opposition and scientific concerns had effectively killed Project Chariot. While the harbor was never built, the military did conduct soil radioactivity experiments in the region. These experiments left contamination that wasn't discovered until the early 1990s, sparking a cleanup effort that lasted 2 decades. In hindsight, Project Chariot stands as a stark example of the era's reckless optimism about nuclear technology, and the resistance that ultimately curbed its misuse. 5. Project 1794, when the U.S. military tried to construct a supersonic flying saucer. Theories about UFOs have fascinated people for decades. While many believe these mysterious flying objects are alien in origin, some suggest they could be secret human-made technologies developed by world governments. Although most scientists agree no known technology could replicate the capabilities attributed to UFOs, that hasn't stopped efforts to try. One such attempt was Project 1794, a declassified U.S. Air Force initiative from the 1950s aimed at building a supersonic, saucer-shaped aircraft. This ambitious project envisioned a futuristic combat vehicle capable of shooting down Soviet bombers during the Cold War. Though it never succeeded, the project demonstrates the lengths to which military research has gone in pursuit of advanced aviation. The project was a collaboration between the U.S. Air Force and the Canadian company, Avro Aircraft, with a bold design brief: create a craft capable of vertical takeoff and landing, speeds of up to 2,600 miles per hour, and altitudes of 100,000 feet. The saucer's design would not only make it highly maneuverable, but also ideal for stealth operations, allowing it to be deployed virtually anywhere. Some even speculate that test models from Project 1794 could explain certain UFO sightings from the 1950s. However, the reality of the project fell far short of its lofty promises. A similar Air Force-funded experiment, the VZ-9 Avrocar, highlighted the technological limitations of the time. Designed to reach speeds of 300 miles per hour, the Avrocar could barely achieve 35 miles per hour and only managed to hover a few feet off the ground. It was plagued by instability, constantly pitching and rolling, rendering it impractical for any real application. By the early 1960s, the U.S. Air Force abandoned Project 1794 due to insurmountable technical challenges. Despite its failure, the project fuels the intrigue surrounding UFOs, as it underscores just how advanced these mysterious crafts would need to be, far beyond what human technology could achieve at the time. The story of Project 1794 remains a fascinating chapter in the history of aviation and the enduring mystery of flying saucers. The CIA's Vampires in the Philippines. The U.S. intelligence community seems to have had a recurring fascination with exploiting folklore in its psychological warfare efforts across Asia. Shortly after the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, devised Operation Fantasia in Japan, a similar plan emerged in the Philippines, spearheaded by the CIA. In 1950, a few years after World War II, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Lansdale arrived in the Philippines. By then a CLA operative, Lansdale brought with him a background in the Air Force and advertising, making him particularly adept at psychological operations. Tasked with weakening the communist Hukbalahap-Huk rebellion, Lansdale looked to Filipino folklore for inspiration. One legendary creature caught his attention: the aswang, a vampiric figure deeply ingrained in local mythology. Lansdale and his team began sowing fear by leveraging these superstitions. They flew over villages, broadcasting curses in Tagalog from loudspeakers and warning that anyone aiding the Huk fighters would be cursed. This psychological tactic reportedly caused some villagers to turn against the rebels, exposing those hiding among them. But Lansdale didn't stop there. In a particularly grisly operation, his team captured a Huk fighter, killed him, and staged the body to appear as though he had been attacked by an aswang. They drained the body's blood by hanging it upside down and left 2 puncture marks on the neck to mimic a vampire bite. When the other Huk fighters discovered the body, they were horrified. Whether they truly believed in the aswang or simply saw the act as a grotesque warning, the result was the same. They abandoned the region. While this macabre tactic succeeded in its immediate goal of dispersing Huk forces, it highlighted the extreme lengths to which the CIA was willing to go. Lansdale's use of folklore in the Philippines remains a strange and unsettling chapter in the history of psychological warfare. 3. The Gay Bomb. The U.S. military's plot to make enemy soldiers fall in love with each other. The notion of soldiers abandoning warfare because they all suddenly fell in love with one another may sound absurd, yet it was once seriously considered by the U.S. military in 1994. This bizarre concept revolved around the creation of a so-called gay bomb. The idea was to develop a chemical weapon that wouldn't harm enemy soldiers, but would instead render them too distracted to focus on combat. For reasons unclear, the U.S. Department of Defense latched onto the idea of sexual attraction as a means of disruption. But how exactly could they weaponize desire to derail military operations? The proposed solution was startlingly outlandish. Design a bomb that would turn enemy troops gay. This hypothetical weapon would be filled with aphrodisiac-like chemicals intended to make soldiers irresistibly attracted to one another. According to a 3-page proposal from Ohio's Wright Laboratory, the gas would cause enemy units to crumble under the weight of their newfound desires. The estimated cost of bringing this plan to life? A staggering $7.5 million. However, the idea lacked any scientific basis. No chemical compound has ever been proven to alter sexual orientation, and even if such a substance existed, there's no guarantee it would induce immediate or universal behavior changes. In reality, the proposal seems to have stemmed from the prejudices and misunderstandings of the time, particularly the homophobia prevalent in the early 1990s. Unsurprisingly, the gay bomb never moved beyond the brainstorming phase, and the concept remains one of the strangest footnotes in military history. 2. Edgewood Arsenal, a Cold War-era human experiment program. On a much more sinister note, not all secret U.S. government operations were bizarre or comically misguided. Some were outright horrifying. The Edgewood Arsenal program stands as one of the darkest chapters in military experimentation. During the Cold War, the U.S. military carried out clandestine experiments on their own soldiers at a facility in Maryland called Edgewood Arsenal. These tests exposed unwitting volunteers to a range of harmful substances, including sarin gasoxide, a lethal chemical weapon developed by the Nazis capable of killing within minutes. Other soldiers were subjected to tear gas, mustard agents, and powerful psychoactive drugs. Many soldiers, unaware of the true nature of the experiments, were told they were simply testing military equipment. In reality, some were unknowingly dosed with substances like LSD, leaving them to endure intense and often terrifying side effects. Most would never have agreed to participate had they been informed of the real risks. The program was overseen by L. Wilson Green, who had chilling goals for these experiments. Green openly sought chemicals that could induce symptoms such as fits, seizures, dizziness, fear, panic, hysteria, hallucinations, depression, hopelessness, suicidal mania, and a lack of initiative. Tragically, the tests often succeeded in producing these outcomes, but at an enormous cost to the soldiers involved. The physical and psychological toll on the volunteers was immense. Many experienced long-term health effects, including nervous system damage, lingering hallucinations, and vision loss. Others were hospitalized, plagued by paranoia, or left with depression and suicidal thoughts that persisted for years. For some, the experiments resulted in permanent psychological scars or chronic illnesses. Shockingly, the Edgewood Arsenal program ran from 1948 until 1975, ending only after a congressional investigation exposed the unethical recruitment methods and lack of informed consent. While the program may have been shuttered, its legacy remains a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked government experimentation. First, Project Capricious. The U.S. military's plan to stop Germany's Africa Corps with goat poop. World War II was a breeding ground for unconventional ideas, as the Allied forces sought every possible advantage against the Axis powers. Among the more bizarre and ill-conceived plans was Project Capricious, a scheme cooked up in 1942 to combat German General Erwin Rommel's feared Afrika Korps in North Africa. At the time, the Afrika Corps posed a significant threat to U.S. forces, and there were concerns that their success might encourage Spain to align with the Axis powers. Desperate for a solution, OSS Research Director Stanley Lovell believed he had a plan, albeit an unorthodox one. Lovell proposed using flies to spread disease among Rommel's troops. The key to this strategy? Goat poop. Morocco, where the Afrika Korps operated, had an enormous population of goats, which produced a steady supply of dung that naturally attracted flies. Lovell's idea was to exploit this by creating synthetic goat feces laced with pathogens. The flies, drawn to the fake poop, would become carriers of disease, spreading it among Rommel's soldiers. To execute this plan, the U.S. planned to airdrop the infected foe dung into enemy-held areas under the cover of night. However, the potential for collateral damage was significant. There was no way to ensure that only enemy troops, and not innocent civilians, would be affected by the spread of disease. Ultimately, Project Capricious was scrapped before it could be implemented. The Germans withdrew from Morocco to focus on the Eastern Front at Stalingrad, rendering the plan unnecessary. While it never saw the light of day, Project Capricious remains a strange footnote in the history of military experimentation during World War II. And that'll do it for today's video. If you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like. Tell us which secretive government project was the craziest. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.